Hello, this is Quentin from Idget Reads and Rambles, and I'm coming at you from the wall. And I figured I would do a review for a book I reread recently. A really good book, The Ice Palace by Tarjei Vesaas. And how awesome a reread for this was. It was fantastic. But first, I'll give you a little bit of information on the author. Tarjei Vesaas, born in Norway, 1897, 100 years and 6 days before I was born, I think. He published his first book, 1928, and he grew to be one of Norway's greatest writers. He published novels, short stories, and poetry in the second language, which I believe you pronounce Nynorsk, which that's quite interesting. If a Canadian author wrote in completely Quebecois French, I'd find that interesting for sure. But what is this book? What's the goal of this book? Initially, when I was about maybe almost halfway through this on a reread, I wrote down The Ice Palace is a 1963 novella set during a Norwegian winter and the coming-of-age story of the main character, Sis. The story concerns two 11-year-old girls, Sis, Un, and their community. Of course, that's correct. That is what the book is, but there's something kind of more to this book. This is not, well, this is obviously it's about Sis and Un, but this is a reflection on grief in this book. That's part of, it's more than Sis and Un. And I'll explain what I mean and how he's accomplishing that soon. But I'll tell you about the main characters right now. Un is an orphan. She lives with her aunt after the death of her mother. She never really knew her father, and she moves towns to this place. I don't think it's named, where Sis lives. And she, at recess, she's always alone. But there's a sort of strength and a sort of strength that kind of emanates from her that Sis finds really attractive. And Sis is very fascinated in her. And then one day she leaves a note on Sis's desk that basically says, "I want to see you after school." They hang out after school, and there's a very spiritual connection between them. And I've heard people in reviews say that it's exaggerated. I've had this type of connection with people, and I would wager that most people have. Like, it is a special connection that you get at a special kind of point, but it's by no means it's by no means unlikely. Well, it is kind of unlikely, but it's by no means impossible. I will say that. Yeah, Un invites Sis over to talk about her parents, and I'll just digress for 1 second. That one of the brilliant things that Vesaas does in this book is he's so good at exploring the minds of characters, specifically children. The way he explores the minds of children is so endearing, and it's kind of bang on. There's a point where Un is showing Sis a family photo album, and she opens a picture and she says, "Oh, this is my mom. She blah 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 blah." And when she goes to her dad, who she never really knew, she says, "This is my dad. He has a car." And that's all she can say about her dad, which is really it's really quite a good cutting way of getting to Un's character. But and yeah, and the theme of the book. But anyways, so Sis is the other one. She's the leader of her friend group at school. She's this kind of fun, she's energetic, she's fun-loving, she wants to connect with Un, both because she finds Un fascinating being the outcast, and more importantly, she wants to connect with Un because of the social cachet that such a relationship might bring her. I think she's an only child in a really happy family. But as the story kind of progresses, she sort of becomes Un, and she has to learn to overcome her grief. She has to learn kind of the true role of community. And she has to learn to develop healthy attitudes towards the past, towards the present. And there's more in there. But this is kind of a Sis's coming-of-age story. And Sis and Un are perfect character foils, I think. One of the things that I really like about this is that I'll get to it, but Sis and Un are the names suggest something, right? You think sis, and obviously in English we think of sister. We think a name that implies blood relation, implies kin, implies community, right? Sis is the person that has all of the support behind her. Un is the person that doesn't. And it comes from the French, in French you have the masculine un and the feminine une. And, and un just mean one. Cis, une, one. Here, singular, alone, isolated. All in the name. So the name, those two names, which I think those are the only characters we get named in the book, everyone is described as through their relationship. There is the new leader of the group. There is Auntie, right? But these are important things to go by. But the central theme of the book is spelled out in those names. And when you really think about it, what Vesaas is trying to do is capture the minds of children, make a universal statement on grief, and make a judgment on grief. And when you think about it just in terms of he wants to capture the minds of children, he wants to tell a story about a person, overcoming their grief, and he wants to do it in 160 pages with 170 pages with a whole lot of white space in there, and do it the way he's doing it with poetry. You're not getting too deep into a character's mind at any one moment beyond a few sort of key moments, but we'll get to that too. But to do it in terms of this is a pretty big task to do it compellingly in 170 pages. 170 light pages, but what makes it even more amazing to me is that he uses these very subtle stylistic changes, these formal choices, to make the thematic statement universal. Vesaas' style deviates from convention in quiet but important ways. The core narrative is third-person retrospective, but some chapters are told in interior monologue. We get some really interesting poetic digressions that are meant to serve as thematic statements in themselves, and then also to mirror the characters, to mirror the characters' mind states, and also these digressions will interact with the core narrative. And a different type of section, which is told in third person present, which that type of section right there is how Vesaas is making this universal. Interesting to note, whenever you see a third person present chapter, that's a larger theme chapter. But anyways, so there's also, we get interior monologue in here. We get third person retrospective, present tense, poetic digressions, interior monologue. We have amazing descriptive passages here, which are just a treat to read. And we also get, these descriptive passages are very mimetic. You get the sense that the landscape and the people are very similar. We also get, there's one, maybe my favorite chapter in the book, one of my top 3 for sure. This chapter is told as a poem. It's just a poem. It's called A Dream of Snow-Covered Bridges. And I'm not going to read it, but is it ever good? Oh my God. And the poem's in second person. So again, it's that idea of, and the second person present. So it's this idea of including the reader into a thematic statement on grief. And one of the things that we should probably note is that Vesaas is a poet through and through. Tell me that this passage can be written by anyone that is not a poet. I dare you. The sun had become strong and warmed the heather and last year's pale grasses. It smelt like some magic morning when one was quite small, and now it lay like ballast, heavy inside them. What a simile, like ballast. Oh, so good. And I guess we can for now, we can kind of talk about the general prose style. I'll read a passage. It's the opening, I think, I'm going to read the entire first paragraph, 3 sentences, and I'll read some of the second paragraph. A young white forehead boring through the darkness. An 11-year-old girl. Sis. It was really only afternoon, but already dark. A hard frost in late autumn. Stars but no moon and no snow to give a glimmer of light, so the darkness was thick, in spite of the stars. Yeah, that is kind of a key description to open the novel. The first image you get is Sis, her young white forehead boring through the darkness. It's a really vivid, poetic passage, and I'll make a couple of comments on his prose style. His prose is often economical. It's often staccato. It's always economical. Sorry, he never employs big words, but his diction is very very simple. But that's kind of deceptive because this book, because it's so deeply psychological, because it's a universal statement and a judgment too. It's a judgment on grief. He's not observing something about grief. He's making a judgment on it. This book is very complicated, despite the easy diction, and it makes use of just the most finely tuned ambiguities that you will read. It's super vivid setting. He has a real talent for selecting these images and situations that simultaneously convey great depth and emotion. And an example of a situation would be later on in the book. There's a scene where there's a seat open in the class, and a new girl who is not Sis or Un comes to the class, and she wants to sit somewhere. And the teacher says, "Oh, there's a chair open right there," and Sis just looks at him and says, "No, there's not. There's no chair open there." Yeah. And that is just such a touching scene to read, especially the way the class reacts and the teacher reacts and what the teacher does. It's so warm. And the perfectly selected image will be the title image, the ice palace. It's a kind of metaphor for, well, what is being described is, it's literally a frozen waterfall. There's this waterfall, and as the Norway cold and in fall, it starts freezing the river, and the water will fall over and hit the ground, and it will create this sort of rising ice structure that eventually, because the water is hitting it and bouncing over it, this ice structure will keep rising, and because the water bounces, it will be like this, almost like this building that has rooms. And it's also a palace, right? It's a place where you go to rule and where you have complete control over. And somebody goes inside of it. But I'm not going to tell you what happens. Although this is not really about the plot, but still, it's really impactful. But that central image is a very vivid, just perfectly selected and emotive, the way it's used in this story, image. And this book his prose is very cold and very clean. And a lot of people say this is a quintessential winter book. When I first read it, before I reread it, I figured that this would be a perfect winter read, especially when I got around the end of the first part and the beginning of the second part. I figured that. But being the great lover of haiku that I am, and here I will flex upon you with my copy of The Monkey Straw Raincoat and Other Poetry of the Basho School, but because I'm a great lover of haiku, and when I reread this, taking into account the character arc, taking into account the last chapters of the book, This thing is far more spring than it is winter, and it is winter, but it is far more spring than it is winter. The character arc is one of the warmest I've ever read. It's one of the warmest, most endearing, just generally beautiful and soothing character arcs you will read. I will guarantee you that. And this thing is just emotionally gratifying. It's never flat. From start to finish, it's emotionally gratifying. But, and before I talk about one of the things I'd like to talk about, which is Harold Bloom's idea of deep reading as healing, I want to read one of these sort of poetic digressions that for some reason I can't find right now. Yeah, this one's called The Bird. And I'm going to read it, and we're going to make a few notes about it. The bird. The wild bird with steel claws drew a slanting stripe between two peaks in no time at all. He did not settle, but climbed once more, slicing his way on. No rest, no certain goal for his perpetual flight. Beneath him spread the winter landscape. It was desolate where he traveled. He sliced it into shreds beneath his eyes. His eyes seemed to send invisible lightning and splinters of glass through the frosty air, and they saw everything. Here he was master, and it was empty of life for that reason. His bristling claws were cold as ice. The freezing wind moaned between them as he flew. The bird, slicing up the desolate moors into shreds and spirals, was death. If, after all, something was alive down among the bushes or trees, the eye would flash lightning and a slanting stripe slice down, leaving even less life than before. He saw nothing that resembled himself. He hovered above the great moors daily, perpetually in flight, never tired. He will not die. A violent snowstorm had passed over the moors. In exposed places, the snow had been blown away. The drifts were loose. There had been no mild spell to pack them. Now they were whirled into enormous waves. Clear weather followed, with cold sunshine. High above, in the air above the ice palace, the slashing eye of the bird watched these alterations of contour. Today the snow on the palace had been swept away, so that it appeared in its true shape. The bird noticed the change, and sent a lightning slash downwards. The splintering eyes first, and himself following. He made an abrupt turn in the middle of his stripe, swung in order to break, came on again, and sliced close by the wall of ice. Then he climbed to a dizzy height, and turned into a small black speck in the sky. The next moment he was on his way down again. Another line was drawn in front of the ice palace at precisely the same point. He was an unfettered bird, threatened by no one, at liberty to do as he liked, to be fascinated when he so wished. He could not leave the spot, nor could he pounce or settle, only slice past the ice wall like a dark puff of wind. The next minute, far away on the horizon, or spiraling upwards. The next moment, past the ice wall again, at the same point. He was no longer a completely unfettered bird with steel claws and accompanying wind. He was bound fast here, the prisoner of his own freedom, unable to give up. What he saw confused him. He would cut himself fatally with his own shreds, as hard as glass where they showed the least. But they ripped up the air. He could not avoid being ripped up himself. So let's get some notes on that. Okay, first things first. The purpose of that, by itself, is kind of unclear. You get a sense that the bird is deaf, and that the bird returns to the ice palace, that he's killing everything he sees, and he kills himself too. So one of the things I like about this book, and passages like that, are the sequencing. The sequencing tells you everything you need to know about that passage, which is why I can read it without feeling like I'm spoiling anything, because based on where it comes in the narrative, you get that it's the bird. The bird is a brilliantly ambiguous symbol. The figure mirrors Sis going to the ice palace mentally and just almost like killing herself. She's not like suicidal or anything, but almost like it's a form of a form of she's ruminating on the ice palace. But this passage is also a reflection on preserving the memory of loved ones through grief. Through grief, there's an implication that what is inside the ice palace, and you will have to read the book to find out. The thing that death cannot kill here retains its life. The thing that Sis is grieving retains its life. Death loses its freedom here. It returns and returns, but it can't get into the ice palace. It sort of dies. And that's beautiful. But it's also, when we think about how this bird is Sis, and this bird could reach so many heights, but it keeps going by the ice palace instead. This is a powerful section, I think, and I just find the prose there to be just stunningly brilliant as well. But yeah, the last thing I want to talk about is really the reason you should read this book. Read it because it is beautiful, it is well constructed. Read it because Vesaas has a ton of skill as a writer. He knows what he's doing, and you are in good hands when you think about when you're reading a Tarjei Vesaas anything, I think. But this book specifically, when you think about Harold Bloom's idea of deep reading as healing, this thing should be right near you. It should be one of the first things that comes into mind. When you read this book, think about the way that grief can sever us from our communities, can impose these sort of toxic isolations on us, and stifle human connection. Think about how we exalt the memories of our loved ones at the cost of our own health. Think about the ways that communities tend to reach out to the helpless. Think about the nobility and necessity of grief, but also think about the necessity of human connection to counteract that grief. And when you pair those themes with Un's fate and Sis's arc, add in Vesaas' skill and poetic flair, then you have a book that is just amazing, edifying, comforting, soothing, and really this is the reason that it's become one of my favorite books of all time on reread. Please, please, please check this one out. You will not want to miss this. But if you do check it out, I actually recommend if this is the only version you can find, get it. But and this is translated my version by Elizabeth Rokan. I don't know. But this is the Sun and Moon Classics version, but this is actually quite a good translation. But I've seen editions of this book that don't have the sort of textual errors that this one has. Sometimes the apostrophes will be left out. One set of apostrophes will be left out of a line of dialogue. Sometimes I remember at one point there was a capital S that was missing, and it said he instead, but it wasn't capitalized, so you could kind of tell. But if that's the only version you can get it by all means. But one of the things I wanted to let someone who might be buying this know that there are small mistakes, and that can be a little bit distracting. So kind of who is Tarjei Vesaas as an author? Who does he remind me of? First and foremost, although I'm not sure really this is the most productive comparison, but Ernest Hemingway. It's like Hemingway has a sense of poetry here that is akin to another author that I'll show you. But Iceberg Theory, probably an apt comparison in a way that Hemingway did not intend with the Ice Palace. But this is, Hemingway, that's a connection that's seriously always there. You have haiku, especially the haiku tendency to explore theme, not through implication. The central haiku technique that I can identify as implication. They don't outright say what something is about. It's more about what is implied. And that's a really admirable thing about Vesaas, that he's able to do it without losing the emotion. Oh no, I think I lost it. No, okay. The next one is Yasunari Kawabata. I think specifically his Palm of the Hand stories. Imagine his Palm of the Hand stories, but instead of, like, there's the structure of Vesaas is better than the Palm of the Hand stories generally. But one of the things about the Palm of the Hand stories is that they exist not for structure's sake. They exist to supply these beautiful images and reflections on, and coded reflections on ideas. And the life of the Palm of the Hand stories often comes through these really beautiful images, or these images that aren't, they might not be beautiful, but they just resonate with you. And Kawabata's poetic sensibility is one that is kind of akin to Tarjei Vesaas, where they're both willing to dabble in finely tuned ambiguities. But the book from Kawabata that you might be thinking about, because you think winter reads, and you automatically think Snow Country by Kawabata. And Snow Country and The Ice Palace are quite different, I believe. Like, the thing about Snow Country is that this is a book about it's about kind of loneliness and despair, and well, it's trying to mask loneliness, right? But it's loneliness, despair, and decay. Whereas Vesaas is all about community and trying to find joy after, when you're grieving. And it's also about growth. Whereas Kawabata, it seems like in this novel, those three things aren't entirely possible. But yeah, that's really it. And I was thinking I got to read more stuff from Vesaas, because I know I'm gonna love the birds. I can almost guarantee it. I want to read the birds, like the bridges. He has like a cycle of 4 novels, I think, about like that focus on the seasons. I'd like to read that. But the next thing I will read is Through Naked Branches, the selected poems. It's the only one my bookstore could find. Which, if you want to read The Ice Palace, check your library out. My library, I live in a relatively small town. My library did have that. But Through Naked Branches, I've read a couple of these, and they're very wintry, but very very good. But yeah, what do you think of The Ice Palace? I loved it. I thought it was really one of the best things I've read as of late, and I think it's might be one of my top 3 to 5 books at this point. Just Vesaas is just a writer that sits very well with me. Like I just really kind of love his poetic sensibility. His characters are quite good. Even and his I like the Hemingway quality as well. I'm thinking specifically about the scene where Un and Sis see the gleams and radiance in each other in the mirror, and that is like a textbook iceberg. I don't know, I forgot the word. Textbook iceberg theory moment. And yeah, that's about it. Wanted to show you my mug. Beautiful coffee mug I got. And since this book, if you get this book, there will be a sense of peace and groovy that you will find. So I've gotten a sense, and I hope you find some peace and groovy as well. Peace out.